Time magazine called him the unsung hero behind the internet. CNN called him a father of the internet. President Bill Clinton called him one of the great minds of the information age. He has been voted history's greatest scientist of African descent. He is Philip Emeagwali. He's coming to Trinidad and Tobago to launch the 2008 Kwame Ture lecture series on Sunday, June 8th at the JFK Auditorium, UWI St. Augustine, 5 p.m. The Emancipation Support Committee invites you to come and hear this inspirational mind address the theme, crossing new frontiers to conquer today's challenges. This lecture is one you cannot afford to miss. Admission is free, so be there on Sunday, June 8th, 5 p.m. at the JFK Auditorium, UWI St. Augustine.
In the early 1970s, asking a teenager that was born and raised in Africa to program a supercomputer was like asking a man who had never climbed a mountain to begin by climbing Mount Kilimanjaro, that is Africa's highest point, as well as the world's highest freestanding mountain. Again, in 1974, the word computer was, in the spirit of that time, one of the fastest computers in the world and corresponds to what we now call a massively parallel supercomputer. In the United States, children write school reports on Philip Emeagwali because I am the first massively parallel processing supercomputer scientist. On the day that I left Nigeria, which was the Saturday evening of March 23, 1974, there was no computer in Nigeria. Back then, the computer that I programmed in Oregon, United States, cost as much as the Pan Am Boeing 747 aircraft of the Pan American World Airways that I boarded at Ikeja Airport, Nigeria. Back then, the Ikeja Airport was not crowded. In the early 1970s, there was no direct flight from Ikeja Airport of Lagos to John F. Kennedy Airport of New York City. Ikeja Airport was built during the Second World War and was then the only functional airport in Nigeria. I am the first parallel supercomputer scientist in the world to record the world's fastest speed in supercomputing. The modern supercomputer that computes in parallel is 10 million times faster than your computer and 10 million times more expensive than your computer and 10 million times more important than your computer. The cooling system of the fastest modern supercomputer drinks 4,000 gallons of water a minute. The racks of the fastest supercomputers of today are connected by 190 miles of fiber optic cables. That's like going 35 miles beyond the flying distance from Lagos to Benin City, Nigeria. Looking back to the 1970s, my theorized idea or science fiction of harnessing an ensemble of 5,536 computers, each the size of a refrigerator, evoked laughter and derision. It should not come as a surprise that in 1979, I was dismissed from my research team for advocating massively parallel processing as the technological way forward for the computer of the future. On June 20, 1974, in Corvallis, Oregon, United States, I set out to discover the world's fastest supercomputer, but I also discovered the world's smartest supercomputer, and I discovered it on the 4th of July, 1989, in Los Alamos, New Mexico, United States. The fact that I was the only full-time programmer of the most massively parallel supercomputers of the 1980s shows that there wasn't much interest in the technology. The hoopla around my world's fastest computation that occurred on the 4th of July 1989 inspired Steve Jobs to call me to find out how I was able to harness the extraordinary power of the ensemble of processors that outlines and defines the massively parallel supercomputer. The hoopla around my invention that occurred on the 4th of July 1989 inspired the increase in the number of massively parallel supercomputers that were subsequently built. Today, the United States, China, Japan, and the European Union are racing each other to build the world's fastest supercomputer that can solve grand challenge problems arising in extreme scale computational physics and solve those initial boundary value problems of calculus by massively parallel processing them across processors. Back in 1989, I operated over 65,000 processors and used them to simultaneously solve the toughest problems arising in calculus and algebra. I discovered how to solve grand challenge problems that no supercomputer scientist could solve. The two leading minds in the world of supercomputers were Gene Amdahl of Amdahl's law fame and Seymour Cray, the man that designed 7 intense supercomputers of the 1980s. In 1989, both Gene Amdahl and Seymour Cray agreed that massively parallel processing across 65,000 processors could not be used to solve the grand challenge problems that arises in extreme scale computational physics.
Insightful and brilliant lecture.